in a million.
Money Sense is brought to you by the Chamber Pension Plan. For further information, visit chamberpension.ky.
To keep our records up to date and to ensure seamless communication, the Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan encourages you to review and update your beneficiaries and contact details, including your email and mailing addresses. You can update your contact information by logging into the member portal or by contacting us at 745-7630 or via email to admin@pensions.ky. Remember to act now to ensure we have the most current information for you. The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan. We're here for you.
Live from Radio Cayman Studio, this is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community.
A very good morning and warm welcome to Money Sense. I'm Simon Caudry and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting this morning's show and welcoming two guests. My first, Georgie Loxton, and my second, Danielle Cadwgan-Evans, to the studio. So good morning to both of you.
Morning, Simon.
Good morning.
Well, Georgie, some of our listeners will know you as a periodic contributor to the show. You run your own investment advisory and consultancy business called Liberty Wealth, and recently brought on a new colleague, Danielle, who will be new to the show. Danielle, if I'm not misunderstanding, you provide tax advice and guidance to people, help them navigate somewhat complex worlds when it comes to UK domiciles, UK residency, and all such things. Have I got that broadly right?
Broadly right, yeah.
Okay, that's better than nothing. So let's kick off though with we're in February, but let's kick off
almost
with
in March, aren't we?
well, okay, yes. But let's kick off with the beginning of a year question, which I asked on my very first show of the 2024, which was. It seems as though I can earn 5% right now sitting my money in a bank account, or not a bank account, in a money market fund in one of the banks. And that seems pretty decent return. Why, when you have your clients who are asking you for financial advice, if they can get 5% for taking no risk whatsoever, how do you encourage them or persuade them or motivate them to do things that are, in their eyes, risky?
Such an interesting question. Well, we have to think about what risk is and risk isn't first to answer that question.
Well, losing money is risky, isn't it? Or
Yes.
potential for losing money, I suppose.
Yes, but is that loss temporary or permanent? That's the question we always pose. And if you're investing in equities, we have to just remind ourselves what we actually own. Remember, we own bits of businesses. And as long as we own enough businesses all across the planet, i.e. we're diversified, we don't just have our money in one business, because one business can disappear overnight, right? Businesses can go bust. But let's say we own bits of businesses all across the planet, in all different countries and all different sectors and industries. There's one thing we know about that, and that's collectively that group of businesses cannot go bust together unless the world actually ends.
Well,
Okay.
I guess we're getting closer to that situation.
We're going to assume the world's not going to end because it hasn't ended yet.
Okay, fair enough.
So let's assume the world doesn't end. What we know is that collection of businesses, the price of those businesses can go down, but it can never stay down. There's never ever been a time in history where the price of the best businesses on the planet has gone down and stayed down. And that's evidenced by the fact that today, the S&P 500, which we can kind of use as a loose representation of the best businesses on the planet, it's the 500 best and biggest businesses in the US, is basically at an all-time high. We're just shy of it, but we've hit an all-time high and we've hovered around it. So there's never been a time in history where the price of those businesses has gone down and stayed down. It's gone down, but it's always turned around and come back up again. So the price of those businesses is volatile. But is volatility risk?
Okay, well, I feel as though you're posing me the question here.
Yeah,
which
is it risk? It's short.
Depends when you
term.
buy it, I suppose, from a psychology
Exactly,
perspective. If
but-
I buy it when it's high and volatility causes a 10% move
Yes.
down, then I get panicked and nervous and anxious.
Yes, and if you respond to that volatility, it becomes risk. But if we cannot respond to it and we can hold those businesses for the long term, then there's no risk. There's no long-term risk in owning businesses. There's short-term volatility, but no long-term risk, because it's never gone down and stayed down.
So I guess a question that one often asks of investment professionals is now a good time to buy the markets? From what you're saying, is a pretty silly question.
Yeah, because the market goes up 75% of the time. So statistically, today's a good day. What's the old saying? It was a Buffett saying, wasn't it, Simon? That the best day to invest
my knowledge now,
the best day to invest your money was yesterday. The next
okay.
best day is today.
Yeah.
Right? The market mostly goes up. Sometimes it goes down. Sometimes it can go down a lot, but we can never know when that's going to happen. So if we can say, well, every 3 years out of 4, the market goes up, if you're not invested, you're betting against the odds.
So we're in February now. When you talk to your clients, do you sort of try and set out a New Year's resolution when you sit down with them around a table and you say, what's your planning for this year? We'll achieve this goal, we'll fix our tax issues, whatever. Do you do that for people, or is a calendar year basis kind of an artificial creation? So it's not.
I think it is a bit artificial. I'm not one for New Year's resolutions, really.
Is that because you break them too often? Well, come on.
It is a bit artificial. I think, generally people come to us, and in fact, a lot of people do come to us at the beginning of the year because that is a time when people want to reset.
Yeah.
We have a lot of kind of new people coming to us at this time of year, but it's really about people's stage of life that causes them to kind of take action and want to set goals. Sometimes it's a big birthday, when people hit 30, 40, 50, when people get married, when they have their first child.
Stop raising the numbers as you look at me like this.
When they, why are you, Simon? When they, maybe they suddenly see that they're 10 or 5 years away from retirement and they realise that they need to get a plan together. It's those kind of big, somebody dies, big things like that cause people to take action.
But from just maybe passing over to Danielle here, from a tax perspective, a calendar year sometimes can be quite an important thing, can't it? So when you're thinking about resolutions, it's probably better to get something done early in the year than later in the year often, in that sense, isn't it?
It can be, yeah. The UK tax year runs from the 6th of April to the following 5th of April, so we're slightly off that calendar year.
Why, do you know why it is? Is there any?
No. But we do. I do speak with clients who do kind of in their brain process on a calendar year, or will plan a move sort of just before the tax year, and just remembering that tax year is from the 6th of April to the 5th of April becomes key to any planning.
Yeah, so I guess there are some artificial, but in a sense created by others, therefore they're artificial, but reasons to think about certain things at the beginning of the year.
Absolutely. And if you were in the US and subject to US taxes, you'd certainly be thinking about things in a calendar year. That's
a fair point, yeah. So people shouldn't, in that sense, or having artificial calendar year New Year's resolutions not necessarily so helpful.
Well, I'd say that. I think it is actually really helpful for some people, because some people really do focus and they need that. Okay. Yeah, I'm less of a kind of New Year's resolution sort of person, but I think resolutions do work for people.
But what about those things that people say that they're going to do when they come to you on their very first meeting and say, I promise I'm going to do this, and then a year later or 2 years later, whatever the time period is, they're not doing what they said they perhaps not intentionally, not doing anything bad as such, but they're not keeping to the promise.
Wow.
Do you see what's the most common things and why? Perhaps not what are, but the reason is perhaps the most important, because if you understand the reason, then you can do something about it, perhaps.
This is a huge topic, Simon. So I always say that a real financial planner or advisor is very much like a personal trainer in the gym. Everybody knows how to get fit and healthy. The knowledge is there. It's the gap between the knowing and the doing.
Well, you say that though, but just to play devil's advocate a little bit, I guess in a sense, finance is a somewhat complicated sort of thing. You talk about tax. There's nothing straightforward about tax. There's nothing straightforward about understanding how to value a company. So someone will say, well, I think the market, but the market's expensive. I hear people say it's expensive.
But
right?
People don't need to be valuing companies.
Okay.
Individuals don't need to value companies.
But there's this aura of complexity around finance.
There is, but the rules are really simple, aren't they? The rules are really simple. I think we as a profession and industry make them really complicated, I think often to serve our own purposes. Absolutely our goal at Liberty Wealth is to keep things as simple as we possibly can and no simpler. And the rules are really simple. You have to take control of your cash flow. You have to make sure you save a little bit every single month. So spend a little bit less than you earn. You want to build up a cash buffer so that you've got a rainy day fund. And over and above that, once you have paid off, let's assume you don't have any high interest rate debt, so no credit cards, no high interest rate car loans, mortgages are a bit different, then you want to start investing a little bit of your paycheck every single month in the best companies in the world. And you want to do that continually and consistently and pretty much never sell them and own them forever. And they're the rules.
You said something there about you should save a little bit of money each month, and I absolutely agree with that. But I think sometimes we get bad advice when we go to banks and we say, I would like to put money into a savings account, because often, particularly in Cayman, savings accounts aren't very constructive in terms of interest rates they may be offering. And yet most banks do have money market funds, which are higher interest rate, instant access, or same next day access. So why are we not telling people more about doing those sorts of things? Not necessarily, but we should be doing more of that sort of thing, shouldn't we?
Trying to get a higher
Yeah,
interest rate on your savings?
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's really hard in Cayman, like you say, really hard. But there are things you can do, as you say, the money market funds. But I mean, ideally, people wouldn't be sitting on vast sums of cash. I mean, if you have somewhere north of 3 months, ideally 6 months, maybe a year worth of living expenses in cash in the bank, you're doing really well. And anything over that, you've probably got too much cash. And that's the money that you need to start thinking about putting into that longer term pot, where you're going to subject yourself to the volatility, but you can ride out that volatility with that longer term money, so long as you've got that short term cash in the bank, and you know that if something happens and you need money, the car breaks down, the roof falls in, you suddenly have to be somewhere in a hurry. You've got that cash there to do it, and you're not having to tap your investment account at an inopportune time when the market's down.
I want to go back to your analogy about the health coach or the fitness coach in the gym, because one of the things I think people find easier to do sometimes is to do something rather than to not do something. And what I mean by that is it's sometimes easier to go for a walk than it is to give up a piece of chocolate or give up a can of soda. And I'm thinking about, say, in finances, I think just at the end of last year, I was going through something in my files and I saw that I still have a subscription to something that I'd had for 3 years and probably hadn't used it in 2 years. But that's quite a difficult thing, to inventory those things that you spend money on, because it feels, well, I've already spent that. So how do you overcome that sort of psychological barrier?
Yeah, we've got this action bias in our brains where we always want to do something, where we always want to do something. And this can be really detrimental when it comes to investing, because it causes people to do all the wrong things at all the wrong times for all the wrong reasons. And it was Bogle, who founded Vanguard, who had a good saying. He said, don't do something, just sit there. And that was his motto, i.e., when it comes to investing, doing nothing is often the right thing to do. And we always say to our clients, we're going to help you do nothing when doing nothing is the right thing to do.
Once you've done something.
Once you've done something, right? Once you've got that plan in place where you're taking a little bit of your money every single month and you're buying little bits of the best businesses on the planet, and you're consistently doing that. You've got that set up, ideally automated, so that you've done it once and then it's just going to be done every single month. Then there's very little that you actually have to do.
In a sense, and I know there's more faults than can be counted on all the hands that are in this studio, but pension systems solve that problem, don't they?
Totally.
Because they take money out of your paycheck before you get to, you grab your hands on it to do something that you shouldn't be, buy that extra car or that boat or whatever. And yet we have such a terribly designed pension system that people are disenfranchised from it. But that would be an easy way to help improve the quality of saving in the community, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. If we could improve the pension system and change a few of the regulations, it would be brilliant.
Maybe more than a few, perhaps. Well, look, I think we're going to take a quick break and then we'll come back and we'll continue this conversation. And also, we're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about what it means to live in Cayman as a foreigner, because thinking you live in Cayman as a foreigner doesn't mean you're no longer part of your home country. It seems quite odd complex, but we'll come and talk about that straight after the break.
To keep our records up to date and to ensure seamless communication, the Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan encourages you to review and update your beneficiaries and contact details, including your email and mailing addresses. You can update your contact information by logging into the member portal or by contacting us at 745-7630 or via email to admin@pensions.ky. Remember to act now to ensure we have the most current information for you. The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan. We're here for you.
This is
Money Sense, bringing an informed financial perspective to the Cayman community. Brought to you by the CFA Society Cayman Islands.
And now, more Money Sense.
Welcome back to Money Sense and our conversation on personal finance and taxation with Georgie and Danielle from Liberty Wealth Partners. Liberty Wealth Partners, right?
You've got it.
Thank goodness for that. Did my research okay. Just before the break, Danielle, I alluded to a subject which I'll be honest, confuses me, which is this idea of someone born in one country, living in Cayman, happily relocated here, has decided Cayman's the place. They've bought their house. They've maybe settled down with a partner. Maybe got those little people who are screaming and biting at their heels and all the rest of it. And so Cayman's the place, and they think that place I was born. Who cares? I mean, that's long in the distant past. And that seems such a easy way of thinking about things, but not quite true, is it?
It's not true. And I think this is very much a British thing as well. So in the US, obviously, you have your annual filing a lot of the time, whether you're actually residing there or not. In the UK, when you leave
Which actually, just before you go to the UK, because you said the US, I think it's an important point which most people in Cayman know this, but it always comes still as a surprise to one or two people, which is a lot of people in Cayman might have had their parents go to the States for their birth, and they would have been born in the States, and often can forget that makes them American whether they wish to be or not, and they're still liable to pay tax potentially for the rest of their life wherever in the world they're living, although they do have an election they can make when they're a teenager, I think, to get out of that. But so America has its own quirky and odd rules, which affects a lot of Caymanians because of the number of people who go to the States for birthing, right?
It does, yeah, and that can really play a big part in the long term planning. So with the UK, we don't have an annual filing, and sort of people who have moved a decade ago or longer, the rules have changed a lot. That's kind of on the back burner, and let's be honest, nobody wants to think about paying tax or future taxes. So we do speak to a lot of people where they're born in the UK, they moved to Cayman maybe as a child or maybe as an adult, and a phrase that we hear often is that they've re-domiciled themselves to Cayman. But domicile is actually a British common law concept. So it's around where you have your domicile of origin, which is where your father was domiciled at the time of your birth.
Got to love the paternal element of the British
But that's
system.
only if your parents were married. If your parents were unmarried, it's your mother's domicile at the time of your birth. Obviously, it is possible to change that, and the reason, just to clarify, is your domicile is really important when talking about inheritance tax. The inheritance tax in the UK is 40%, so there is a nil rate band of £500,000 that's available to Brits, but after that, you're looking at 40% on your worldwide assets.
So somebody in their 40s, for instance, whose parents might have just passed away, and they think, I've been in Cayman for 10 years, not worrying about what the implications of tax, because they're not paying tax in the UK. They think they're out of that system. You're basically saying might not be the case, because if you're inheriting money, you might still, or also not you, if your children are inheriting money in some course, your estate still may be taxable, is that case?
It may be, yeah. And I think this ties really nicely with what Georgie does in the financial planning as well, because if you have to pay that 40% inheritance tax and you are still domiciled in the UK, just being aware of the fact that you may have to pay that plays a big part in the long-term estate planning for an individual. There are ways to change a domicile. You can make a domicile of choice. There's kind of two-pronged approach that you've left the UK indefinitely, but the one that people often kind of brush over is that you intend to remain where you are now, let's say Cayman, for the rest of your life. So it's really just giving that forethought to, okay, I've left the UK, I'm going to stay in Cayman forever. How do I and with tax, it's always the same. How do I document that? How do I prove that? What actions do I take to support that decision?
This only affects inheritance because the UK, unlike the US, so most countries are unlike the US in that sense, only taxes income where you reside. So there's no income tax issue for a British person being in Cayman. It's purely from an inheritance tax perspective.
When we're talking about domicile, yeah.
But then a lot of people in Cayman will send their children to school in the UK, maybe university, or perhaps have a house or apartment in the UK. Yeah. Does that have any bearing then on one's situation in this respect?
It can do, and it isn't clear cut with domicile. It's really looking at all of the facts of your whole life and which side of the fence do they fall on. Does that support the idea that you never intend to return to the UK and that you intend to remain in Cayman? Or does it add a bit of ambiguity that actually they've bought a house and their children are now grown, their grandchildren are in the UK, and does that support that actually they may return to the UK at some point? But there are things you can do. So obviously children, once they're adults, hopefully make their own independent decisions. So we do work with clients on looking at domicile statements, where you look at each individual part of your life and then you basically make a statement around, my children are independent from myself, they don't impact my decisions. Yes, they're in the UK, I can afford to fly to the UK once a year to see them, therefore I intend to stay in Cayman. So it's really just having that forethought to address those questions.
I guess, phrased differently, you sent your children to boarding school and good riddance, and that's I've got rid of them now, so I never want to see them again. The fact they're there is not my problem.
I think one really important point here, and Danielle can talk about this, is people always say, but how will HMRC know?
Yeah.
So let's say you've been out of the UK, like
HMRC being the tax people in the UK.
In the UK, yeah. I've been gone 20 years. I don't file a UK tax return because I have no income in the UK. If I was to die, how would HMRC know? That's a big question. How would they know that I have an estate here in Cayman that could be subject to 40% tax back in the UK?
That's a very good question. I should have thought of that. Go on.
And people say this all the time, like how they, how would they know? And Danielle can talk about the sharing of information now that's going on.
Yeah, it's the question that is always asked, whether you're talking about income tax, inheritance tax, anything. The first question people always ask is, but if I'm in Cayman, how will they know? But with the increased technology, and HMRC have like a new supercomputer that is constantly running algorithms on different cohorts of people that can pick up cohorts of Brits that are either overseas, that may have a house in the UK, or that have spent a significant amount of time in the UK.
Or just coming in and out of the UK.
Yeah, just coming in and out. It's unlikely that they would pick someone up who doesn't file a tax return, who has no assets in the UK. But it is a possibility. And I think it always comes down to different people's appetite for risk. You were talking about risk before, and we meet some people who think, well, I'm just not going to worry about that. And some people where actually they really want to plan for that and do the right thing so that they're not caught out on the back foot.
Are there ways of, let's say you do have sufficient closeness to the UK so that you might be affected by this. Are there ways of managing this, whether it be from the investments that you do, whether it be through setting up a structure for the benefit of your children? So are there ways of mitigating this problem potentially?
In terms of reducing
your
tax?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, there are, and there are all these wonderful complex structures, different offshore companies and funds, and again it comes down to an individual and their appetite for planning. So we meet people who are adamant they want to do everything they can within the legislation to reduce their inheritance tax. We meet some people who know that they're going to pay inheritance tax, just want everything simplified. And something that's often overlooked is gifting. So gifting is a really useful inheritance tax planning tool for Brits. So there's two main different types of gifts. One is you can gift capital, you might buy a house or gift shares or investments, and they become potentially exempt transfers. So once you've made that gift to your children and you live for 7 years, they kind of drop out of the scope of inheritance tax.
So I should be replaying this show for my mum and dad and say, gift me all your money. And
there's so much to be said about it.
Yeah.
I mean, we always say to our clients,
I'll tell you next year how that went.
Over. Is your dad listening?
But it ties in really nicely with how you work with clients that are coming up to retirement. And
because you've got to have a financial plan around it, because people are actually quite scared of gifting because they worry that they're going to run out of money.
Right.
If they don't have a financial plan that says, listen, this is how much money you actually need to live on, and the rest, throughout your life, you really can gift. And we always say to people, it's so much better to give when you're alive with a warm hand than when you're dead from the grave. You can get so much joy in your life by giving your money to your children or to charities or to institutions or to other family members or friends or whoever and whatever it is that is important to you.
Don't be encouraging to give it to anyone but me.
Doing it while you're alive rather than taking it all with you to the grave. And as Danielle says, then you're not going to pay the people that are left behind aren't going to pay the inheritance tax because they've already had it.
Yeah, it is a really great tool. And the other one that you can use is gifting out of normal income. So there are a couple of rules around that. But if you are receiving regular income, and you can sort of give your children or anybody else a gift from regular income. So we say quarterly, generally at least, or monthly. And it has to be out of regular income that you're receiving. And it also, you can't sort of like sell a capital asset and use that money to give out of regular income. And it has to not change your lifestyle. So that could be things like, I don't know, paying for kids' mortgages or their holiday pot or grandkids' school fees or whatever it might be. It's really useful to use those tools. And once you know what that pot needs to look like for your retirement to reduce your inheritance tax, you can use the rest to utilise that gifting. And you haven't got that structure, that complex administrative burden that often funds and offshore companies can create.
One thing that dawned on me when I was preparing for the show is that during the COVID experience, a lot of people work from home, worked remotely. And does that increase the potential for people to make mistakes in terms of going to somewhere for too many days and find themselves to be at the mercy of a tax person that they didn't expect?
Yes, we've seen this with a lot of hypothetical questions. Yes, absolutely. So with spending time in the UK, often people know that they're not resident, but they don't know how they're not resident. Right. So they're not really sure. They think they can probably spend about 90 days, but they don't know what the stipulations are around that. So that's something that we work with clients on, is understanding how they're non-resident and how many days can they spend in the UK or a different jurisdiction, and how many work days they can spend in that jurisdiction, because that does come into play. The other thing that is really important, particularly with the UK, is the double tax treaty between Cayman and the UK doesn't cover employment income. So depending on what you're doing, so you go to the UK, if you're British, you might go for sort of 6 weeks in the summer, and you're spending that whole time working, doing your normal job. That can cause tax issues, and it comes to the same question that I'm always asked is, but how would they know? And the UK system is a self-assessment system.
But also, I guess when you go in through the UK, your passport scanned, they know what dates you're there.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the risks are really high in terms of penalties and fines for getting offshore income wrong. So when it comes to offshore income, the penalties can be 200% of the tax owed. So they are quite high.
200% of the tax owed. So that can be a nasty number.
A nice deterrent there,
Wow.
That can be a nasty number.
If you get picked up for an investigation by HMRC, it's a really
it's time consuming, it's stressful. So really what we work with clients on is understanding how much time they can spend in the UK, how many work days, how many holiday days, really looking at that, what they do whilst they're there, putting boundaries around that, so that they're either within not paying tax or they know how much tax they need to pay. And just really planning. It's all about the planning and the foresight.
So if you, I guess, trying to sort of put it for my own simplicity, if I'm someone who does spend time in other countries, it doesn't have to be the UK, because people can be from anywhere in the world living in Cayman. You've got to think about how many days you're going to be back in your home country. Your home country might have different rules. You've got to think about how many days of those are working, because if you haven't thought about those and you get it wrong, the implications can be quite unpleasant.
They can be unpleasant. And the other thing that's quite unpleasant is one of the questions that I know HMRC ask, and I assume other jurisdictions, tax authorities would ask the same, is you're spending time here, did you get tax advice?
Spending time in the UK? Or
in the UK, in France, in Europe, in America. And the question that they'll ask is, did you receive tax advice? And obviously you want the answer to that to be yes.
Well, that's a note that we can't end on that note. We must end on a slightly happier note than did you receive tax advice? No. Top ideas. What's tell me something optimistic about what's going to happen in 2024. Go on. Give me a market thought from your perspective as to, or not maybe market thought, but an idea that people need to keep in mind, a best practice perhaps. Best practice from an investment or from a behavioural perspective to look after your wealth as 2024 moves ahead.
Well, there's only 3 things you really need to, characteristics, I guess, you need to have in order to be a good investor, and that's faith, patience and discipline.
What was the first one? Faith, patience, and discipline.
So continue to have faith.
I'm not patient. I'm not very disciplined. And those who know me will know the first one lacks as well.
The market's at an all-time high, but all-time highs tend to cluster, which means that you tend to get more and more all-time highs. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of momentum behind the market now, and people often feel really pessimistic when the market's at a high, but actually we should feel pretty optimistic that the market is going to continue going higher this year based on statistics.
In some respects, with markets being at such highs, a lot of people will have gains, which drills into the need perhaps to be even more sensible about your taxation situation, because if you've just lost a lot of money and markets have crashed, the likelihood of having unexpected taxable events is lower. Now the likelihood of having taxable gains is substantially higher because markets have gone up, 25-30%.
Particularly if you're thinking about moving back to the UK.
Well, look, we've almost ended on a slightly happy note, which is the market's at an all-time high, and in Georgie's words, 75% of the time it goes up. So don't be shy about investing, perhaps is the expression there. Look, to both of you, Georgie and Danielle, thank you very much for joining me this morning. It's been a lovely time having you, and as I now need to think and plan about my own taxation a bit better, obviously. So I appreciate the nervous warning for me there. If someone has more questions, presumably your website, they can get in contact with you and Absolutely. They can come for some hypothetical questions.
libertywealth.ky.
There we go. I'm glad you said it because I didn't make a note of that. So thank you very much. Final note, just to thank all our listeners for tuning in. And do remember, this show will be available on YouTube as a podcast. And if you have any questions, send us an email. And we can try and deal with those and put that as a show topic. Again, thanks again for tuning in, and do join us once again in 2 weeks' time.
Money Sense is brought to you by the Chamber Pension Plan. For further information, visit chamberpension.ky.
To keep our records up to date and to ensure seamless communication, the Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan encourages you to review and update your beneficiaries and contact details, including your email and mailing addresses. You can update your contact information by logging into the member portal or by contacting us at 745-7630 or via email to admin@pensions.ky. Remember to act now to ensure we have the most current information for you. The Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan. We're here for you.